Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a really crucial question for anyone digging into Bitcoin. Considering the specialized hardware needed for mining, how decentralized is it truly?
Right.
You, the learner, you get the basics. But what you're after is a deeper look. Does the concentration in ASIC manufacturing, the actual hardware makers, pose a genuine threat to Bitcoin's core idea of decentralization?
Exactly. And it's a fair question. We've pulled together several sources to really get to the heart of this. We're looking at reports on the ASIC manufacturers themselves, some explanations from BitPay and the Bitcoin Wiki about nodes, an academic paper looking at the economics, and articles on mining pools and hardware.
So the mission is to dissect this tension. Bitcoin's supposed to be distributed peer-to-peer, but the mining, the crucial security part, seems reliant on hardware from just a few companies. Is that a contradiction?
That's the core puzzle we're trying to unpack.
Okay, so let's start with the foundation. Forget the buzzwords for a second. What actually makes Bitcoin decentralized, especially thinking about these miners and their hardware?
Well, fundamentally, it's that peer-to-peer network idea. Like BitPay puts it, users interact directly. No central bank, no middleman needed for transactions.
Great, direct peer-to-peer.
And this is all supported by a network of nodes. The Bitcoin Wiki defines a node pretty simply just any computer on the network. But the key part for decentralization is the full nodes.
Full nodes, okay.
Yeah, BitPay noted, I think early 2024, there were around 18,000 public full nodes spread across the globe. These aren't miners necessarily. They're independent computers storing the whole blockchain, checking every transaction, enforcing the rules.
So they're the referees, basically, the thousands of scattered computers.
Precisely. The Bitcoin Wiki really highlights this. If a miner tries to submit a block with, say, an invalid transaction or tries to claim too big a reward, like more than the current 3.125 BTC.
Which they might be tempted to do.
Maybe, but these full nodes operating independently, they just reject it, flat out. It doesn't matter how much computing power, how much hash rate that miner has. If the block breaks the rules, it's invalid according to the nodes.
And changing those rules isn't easy, I gather.
No, not at all. It typically requires what's called a hard fork, a major software update. And for that to stick, you need overwhelming agreement from the whole community, including all those node operators. It's designed to resist control by any single group, even powerful miners.
Okay, that makes sense. Independent rule enforcement is key.
Yeah.
So where do the miners with their specialized hardware fit into this decentralized picture? They're not the rule enforcers, but they are essential, right?
Absolutely essential. And it's a good distinction to make. As BitPay clarifies, you have different types of nodes. Those archival full nodes we just talked about store everything. Then there are light nodes, which rely on full nodes.
Okay.
And then you have mining nodes. These are often full nodes, but their special job is performing that intense calculation, the proof of work, to actually add new blocks to the chain.
That's the mining part.
That's the mining part. And as BitPay points out, this is crucial for security. The sheer amount of energy and computational effort miners expend on proof of work makes the blockchain incredibly difficult and expensive to tamper with retroactively. It secures the history.
Got it. They build the new blocks and secure the past ones through effort. Now let's get to the listener's main concern, the hardware itself, the ASICs. Why is the fact that only a few companies make these things potentially a problem?
Right. So Bitcoin mining isn't done on laptops anymore. It's all about efficiency. And the absolute best tools for the job are ASICs, application-specific integrated circuits.
Custom chips.
Exactly. Custom-designed silicon built for one task only. Hashing for Bitcoin's proof of work. Reports like the one from Verified Market Research show they blow general-purpose hardware like GPUs out of the water in terms of speed and power efficiency.
And who are the big names making these custom chips right now, say, as of April 2025?
Well, based on that Verified Market Research data, the market is really dominated by a handful. You've got Bitmain, they make the popular ant miners. There's MicroBT with their What's miners. Canaan is another major one with the Avalon line.
Okay, Bitmain, MicroBT, Canaan. Any others?
Yeah, there are others mentioned like ASIC, Chrysing, eBang, Bitfury Group, and DigBig. But the market share, it's not evenly split.
Right. How concentrated are we talking?
Very. Current estimates put Bitmain way out front, maybe around 74% of the market.
Wow, 3/4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then MicroBT is estimated around 18%, and Canaan maybe 8%. So just those three companies control something like 99% of the new ASIC hardware supply.
Significant concentration.
It is. And add to that, most of this manufacturing is geographically concentrated too, mostly in Asia, historically a lot in China. That brings up potential issues, supply chain risks, geopolitical stuff.
And these machines, the top ones, they aren't cheap, are they? I remember seeing figures like over $11,000 for a high-end Bitmain model.
Absolutely. The latest, most efficient ASICs are serious investments. Plus, they chew through electricity. So you need deep pockets for the hardware and access to cheap power to compete.
Which sounds like a huge barrier for, like, just regular individuals wanting to mine. It pushes towards bigger, well-funded operations, doesn't it?
It certainly does. The economics favor scale. High upfront costs, high running costs. It naturally leads to more industrial scale mining operations rather than folks mining in their garage, which was maybe possible in the very early days.
Okay, so here's the core question again. If only, say, 3 companies make almost all the essential gear, and they control who gets it, when they get it, doesn't that give them immense power? Couldn't they theoretically choke supply or favor certain large miners or even hypothetically build in some kind of hardware backdoor? Doesn't that undermine decentralization?
That's the crux of the concern, and it's not an unreasonable one. If it were a true monopoly, one company controlling everything, yes, that would be a massive centralization risk.
But it's not quite a monopoly.
Right. We do have multiple players, even if the market share is skewed. Bitmain, MicroBT, Canaan, and the others, they do compete to some extent.
Yeah.
That provides at least some redundancy. If one supplier had issues, others could potentially step up, though maybe not immediately cover all demand.
And are there efforts to make this less concentrated?
Yes, there are. Block, Inc., formerly Square, is one example. They've been very public about developing their own 3-nanometer mining chip and a full mining system. Their stated goal is explicitly to improve mining decentralization, including the hardware supply.
So new players trying to enter.
Exactly. And things like open source hardware initiatives pop up now and then, too. So while concentration is high now, there's awareness and some pushback. But the most critical point to circle back to is,
Go on.
even if you control the tool manufacturing, you don't automatically control the network.
The distinction between the hardware and the network rules again.
Precisely. Making the shovels doesn't mean you dictate where everyone digs or what they're allowed to find. The power to enforce the Bitcoin protocol's rules rests with that global network of independent full nodes we talked about earlier.
Thousands of them, all checking the work.
Thousands of them. They are the ultimate arbiters of validity. If a manufacturer or a group of miners using their hardware tried to force a change to the rules the nodes don't agree with, the nodes would simply reject their blocks.
Okay, so manufacturing concentration is one thing, network control is another.
Exactly. And there's an economic argument, too. Why would Bitmain or MicroBT try to fundamentally break Bitcoin or introduce some fatal flaw?
It would destroy their own business model.
Right. Their entire business depends on a functioning, valuable Bitcoin network. If they did something to undermine trust and crash the price, they'd be shooting themselves in the foot, economically speaking.
That makes sense. Self-preservation.
Plus, there's the social layer. The Bitcoin community, particularly the node operators and developers, is generally very resistant to changes perceived as centralizing or compromising the core principles. They act as another check.
So even if ASIC manufacturing looks centralized, the actual control over Bitcoin's rules remains fundamentally distributed because of the nodes and the community.
That's the main takeaway. The nodes enforce the rules agreed upon by the community. Hardware manufacturers provide tools, but they don't dictate the rules of the game.
Now quickly, what about mining pools? We hear about those concentrating hash rate too. Does that add another layer of risk related to this hardware?
It's related, yeah. Miners often pool their resources to smooth out their income. Finding a block is rare, so pools share the rewards. But it does mean that sometimes just a couple of pools can control a large percentage of the total network hash rate.
I remember seeing figures, maybe late 2022, where 2 pools had over half the network power.
Yeah, Foundry USA and Antpool have historically been very large. More recent data might show slightly different percentages, like maybe Foundry around 17% and Antpool near 15%. But combined, and with the top 5 pools often controlling over 50%, it's definitely a concentration point worth monitoring.
But again, does pool control equal network rule control?
No, fundamentally it doesn't. The pool operators coordinate the hashing power of individual miners using whatever hardware they have, but they still have to create blocks that follow the consensus rules otherwise.
The nodes reject them.
The nodes reject them, and individual miners can, in theory, switch pools if they disagree with the pool operator's actions. So it's another area of potential centralization pressure, but distinct from changing Bitcoin's core protocol.
Okay, so we've touched on academic work suggesting economic forces might push towards larger miners having an advantage, potentially increasing mining centralization over time.
Yes, some research looking at data from like 2012 to 2017 suggested that miners with lower operating costs and better access to capital for the newest hardware, basically, the big guys tend to fare better, especially when mining difficulty is high.
Which supports the idea of mining centralizing.
It supports the potential for mining operations to centralize, yes. But again, that's about who's doing the mining, not necessarily who controls the validation and enforcement of the network's rules. Those remain separate functions, largely performed by the distributed nodes.
So wrapping this specific point up, true decentralization in Bitcoin, when you look past the hardware manufacturing numbers, seems to be rooted more in the distributed verification of the rules than in the distributed production of mining gear.
I think that's a very good way to put it. Decentralization isn't just one thing. It has layers. The ASIC market concentration is a valid concern, definitely something to watch. But Bitcoin's resilience comes primarily from the fact that no single entity, not Bitmain, not the biggest mining pool, nobody can unilaterally change the rules that are enforced by thousands of independent nodes all over the world. That's the bedrock.
That provides a much clearer perspective on how to weigh the hardware concentration issue against the network's overall design. Thanks for walking us through that complex landscape.
You're welcome. It's definitely got multiple facets.
And for you, the learner, here's something to think about. ASIC technology doesn't stand still. It gets faster, more efficient. The economics shift constantly. What future innovations or changes, maybe breakthroughs in chip design, maybe new companies finally breaking through that Bitmain MicroBT dominance, maybe even viable open source hardware could push Bitcoin mining towards more decentralization at the hardware level. Or could it centralize further?
Yeah. What role will initiatives like Blockschip play or efforts in different geographic regions?
It's a dynamic space. To really get a handle on it, you could dig deeper into specific Bitcoin improvement proposals or BIPs related to the network. Follow the discussions about mining pool protocols like Stratum v2, and definitely keep an eye on who's entering or trying to innovate in the ASIC manufacturing game. Understanding those ongoing developments is key to assessing how Bitcoin's decentralization might evolve.
Absolutely.
Until our next deep dive, keep exploring.
Today we're diving into something pretty intriguing, a real what if.
Yeah, it's a scenario that touches on some core aspects of how proof of work operates.
What if those manufacturers, the ones making the cutting-edge mining gear, decided to, well, hold back the newest generation?
And not just hold it back, but use it themselves first.
Exactly. Use it themselves for, say, a few months to basically dominate block production and rake in the profits before releasing it publicly.
It's a fascinating thought experiment, really. It gets right to the heart of potential centralization pressures and the power held by those who build the essential tools. Could that tech advantage be deliberately leveraged?
Okay, let's really paint the picture. So imagine a major player, maybe Bitmain or MicroBT or even one of the newer outfits, develops a new ASIC.
And this thing is like way more efficient, solves blocks faster, uses less juice. A serious leap forward.
Right, but instead of announcing pre-orders and shipping them out wide,
They keep a huge chunk, maybe the first big production run, entirely for their own mining farms. Or perhaps they give it just to a few very close partners.
So for a limited time, maybe a few months, this small group suddenly has access to tech that nobody else does.
And that directly translates to hash rate, doesn't it?
It does. Their share of the total network computing power, the hash rate, would just skyrocket compared to everyone else still using the older gear.
And we know higher hash rate means a much better chance of finding the next block.
Which means getting the block reward the new Bitcoin created, plus all the transaction fees in that block.
So during that window, this select group with the secret sauce hardware could just accumulate rewards at a vastly accelerated rate. They'd be profiting directly from holding back the tech.
It kind of echoes the concerns we already hear about mining pool centralization, right? Like when Foundry USA and Ant pool together sometimes control over half the hash rate.
That's a really good connection, yeah. This scenario is almost like pre-pool centralization, happening right at the source, the hardware manufacturer level. Instead of just aggregating power, they're controlling access to the most powerful hardware itself.
So if this did happen, what's the immediate fallout for the network? It sounds like it would pour fuel on those centralization fires.
Oh, absolutely. It would be a stark example of economic incentives potentially driving centralization, even if it's temporary. You'd have a situation where Technological advantage, controlled by a few, directly leads to disproportionate block production power.
What does that mean for, the average user or the network's overall health during that period?
Well, the good news is Bitcoin's core design is pretty robust. You've got, something like 18,500 public full nodes out there.
Right, the ones that validate everything.
Yeah. Exactly. So even a miner with a huge chunk of hash rate can't just rewrite the rules or steal funds outright. Those nodes enforce the consensus.
Okay, so they can't break Bitcoin, fundamentally.
Probably not fundamentally, no. But there could be more subtle things, maybe influencing which transactions get prioritized in blocks, or potentially having a bigger say in discussions about future network upgrades, even if it can't force them through. It shifts the power balance.
And what about the little guy, the small scale or individual miner?
Forget about it. It's already incredibly tough. I mean, look at the prices for top-tier ASICs now that Antminer S21 Hyde is over 11 grand. And that's before power and cooling.
Yeah, the barriers are high.
So if a new generation, way better than that, is being kept secret and used by the manufacturers, it basically makes competing impossible for anyone not in that inner circle. It just slams the door shut even harder.
It feels like it undermines that whole idea of, decentralized mining being open to more people. Even if the validating nodes are spread out, the production of blocks gets super concentrated.
Precisely. The mining itself becomes much more exclusive. Their main business is selling hardware, right?
True.
While grabbing a few months of boosted mining rewards could be lucrative, selling thousands, maybe tens of thousands, of these new units to the global market is likely where the real big sustainable profit is. Market research points to huge growth in ASIC demand.
Bitmain, MicroBT, Canaan, others trying to get in like Block, Inc.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Competition is key. Even with Bitmain having a large market share, maybe around 74%, MicroBT and Canaan are significant, and new players add uncertainty. If a block breaks the rules, the nodes reject it. So even a dominant miner can't force through invalid changes.
And then there's the difficulty adjustment. That would react, wouldn't it?
That's Bitcoin's built-in thermostat. If a bunch of super fast miners suddenly come online and blocks start being found way too quickly.
The network automatically makes the puzzle harder to solve.
Correct. So the huge advantage the hoarders had would start to diminish as the difficulty cranks up for everyone, including them.
And what about the software itself? Bitcoin Core is open source.
That's another layer. Miners might have fancy hardware, but the rules they're following are defined by the software the nodes run.
So a manufacturer couldn't easily force a software change just because they control a lot of hash rate.
It provides resilience against that kind of top-down control.
Okay, so it seems like Bitcoin has several mechanisms, economic incentives, competition, nodes, difficulty adjustment, open source software that would likely prevent this hypothetical scenario from causing long-term catastrophic damage or capture.
Yes, the system is designed with multiple layers of defense against various kinds of attacks or centralizing pressures.
But could even a temporary period of this, where manufacturers are clearly self-dealing with new tech, cause damage, maybe erode trust?
That's the lingering question, isn't it? Even if the network technically weathers the storm, the perception could be impacted. If it becomes clear that insiders with control over hardware production can give themselves a massive head start.
It doesn't feel very fair.
Exactly. It could fuel narratives that Bitcoin isn't as decentralized or accessible as claimed. It might make people question the fairness of the coin distribution if the creators of the shovels get first dibs on the gold mine for months.
And does the fact that ASIC manufacturing is pretty concentrated, you mentioned Bitmain's large share, MicroBT, Canaan holding most of the rest, does that concentration itself mean this risk is always kind of there?
I think it does. When the tools essential for securing the network are produced by just a handful of companies, the potential for strategic behavior, for prioritizing self-interest or close partners, always exists. It's an inherent tension.
Which is why maybe seeing new players like Block, Inc. getting into chip design is seen as a positive. More diversification.
Potentially, yes. More viable manufacturers could increase competition, make hoarding riskier, and generally distribute that hardware power more widely. It could dilute the influence of any single manufacturer.
Okay, this has been really illuminating. We've walked through this what-if manufacturers holding back new ASICs to mine themselves first.
We looked at how it could temporarily boost their profits and concentrate hash rate.
But also why they might not do it. Sales competition, the network's own defenses like nodes and difficulty adjustments.
And the potential impact on trust, even if the network itself remains resilient. It really highlights that constant push and pull between the economics of the system and the ideals of decentralization.
So that leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. Given this potential for hardware manufacturers to, well, game the system for initial profit, how much should we worry about the concentration in that specific industry? Is it a significant threat to the long-term health and, importantly, the perceived fairness of proof-of-work crypto?
And building on that, other ways may be technological or market-based to encourage even more decentralization and access to that crucial cutting-edge mining hardware. Something definitely worth thinking about.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.